This is Land of Havilah, Hosea 10. The theme of Israel's destruction continues, and of Judah too, but especially Israel. Verse 1. Israel is a luxuriant vine that produces his fruit. According to the abundance of his fruit, he has multiplied his altars. As their land has prospered, they have ordained their sacred stones. Their heart is divided. Now they'll be found guilty. He'll demolish their altars. He'll destroy their sacred stones. Surely now they will say, "We have no king, for we don't fear Yahweh, and the king, what can he do for us?" Comment in verses 1 to 3, Israel is a luxuriant vine, but prolific is more like it. As in a vine that's very healthy, it grows very well, but it produces nothing good. Israel is a prolific vine that pours out much bad fruit, such as the many altars and sacred stones they produce for idolatry. In verse 2, their heart is divided between Yahweh and other gods. They'll be held guilty. Yahweh will demolish their altars and sacred stones. In verse 3, Israel figures they have no king because they don't consider Yahweh to be their king. And the second part of that is probably to the effect, why do we need Yahweh as king anyway? Verse 4. They make promises, swearing falsely in making covenants. Therefore judgment springs up like poisonous weeds in the furrows of the field. Comment in verse 4, judgment's also translated legal disputes, so the verse would be something like, when they make contracts, they're lying. Therefore legal disputes spring up like weeds in the furrows of the field. Verse 5. The inhabitants of Samaria will be in terror for the calves of Beth-aven, for its people will mourn over it, along with its priests who rejoiced over it for its glory, because it has departed from it. It will also be carried to Assyria for a present to a great king. Comment in verse 5, once again, Beth-aven means house of wickedness. It's the third time in this book Yahweh has mentioned it. To the Israelites, the city was Bethel, which means house of God, but to Yahweh, Bethel was Beth-aven, which means house of wickedness. The background is that when Israel split with Judah, the first king of Israel didn't want his people going to Jerusalem to worship, so he invented his own religion and made Bethel the home of it. He constructed a high place there, set up a golden calf, and formed a priesthood from scratch, 2 Kings 23:15. When the king put the calf at Bethel, he said, "This is your God, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt," 1 Kings 12:28. So no wonder Yahweh calls Bethel Beth-aven, house of wickedness. Therefore the gist of verses 5 and 6 would be, the house of Israel will be aghast at the loss of their calf idol at Beth-aven. The glory will depart from that place. They'll mourn the loss. The glory will be carried to Assyria and presented to a great king, meaning all the valuable items at Bethel will be carried away. Still in verse 6. Ephraim will receive shame, and Israel will be ashamed of his own counsel. Samaria and her king float away like a twig on the water. The high places also of Aven, the sin of Israel, will be destroyed. The thorn and the thistle will come up on their altars. They will tell the mountains, "Cover us," and the hills, "Fall on us." Israel, you have sinned from the days of Gibeah. There they remained. The battle against the children of iniquity doesn't overtake them in Gibeah. When it's my desire, I will chastise them, and the nations will be gathered against them when they are bound for their two transgressions. Comment for verses 6 to 10. Let's give a few explanations, then we'll give the flow of it. Aven means wickedness, so the high places of Aven in verse 8 are the high places of wickedness. They're the many idolatrous temples and shrines on the hilltops and so forth. And in verse 8, when they tell the mountains and hills to fall on them and cover them, they're wishing there was some way they could be hidden from God's wrath. In verse 9, the days of Gibeah, as we said, refers to an incident in Judges chapters 19 and 20. There was some immorality that was so outrageous it resulted in a war, and only 600 Benjamites survived. The sentence, "the battle against the children of iniquity doesn't overtake them in Gibeah," is also translated, "Did not war overtake the evildoers in Gibeah?" This refers to Benjamin being almost destroyed in war because of their immorality. In verse 10, Israel will be bound to their two transgressions. It's not clear what the two transgressions are, but maybe in the previous verse it was the sin of Gibeah long ago, and the failure to repent of it ever since. That they're bound to their sins means the charges against them will stick, or it means they won't part from sin. So with those explanations, verses 6 to 10 are something to the effect, Ephraim will be ashamed and Israel ashamed of his own counsel. Samaria and her king will float away like a twig on the water. The high places of wickedness will be destroyed. Their altars will be overgrown with thorns and thistles. They'll tell the mountains, cover us, and the hills, fall on us. Israel, you have sinned grievously since the days of Gibeah and remain in that sin. Weren't the evildoers at Gibeah overtaken in battle? So shall you be. In my own time I will chastise them. The nations will be gathered against them for battle because they refuse to depart from sin. Verse 11. Ephraim is a trained heifer that loves to thresh, so I'll put a yoke on her beautiful neck. I'll set a rider on Ephraim. Judah will plow. Jacob will break his clods. Sow to yourselves righteousness. Reap according to kindness. Break up your fallow ground, for it's time to seek Yahweh until he comes and rains righteousness on you. You've plowed in wickedness. You've reaped iniquity. You've eaten the fruit of lies, for you trusted in your way in the multitude of your mighty men. Therefore a battle roar will arise among your people, and all your fortresses will be destroyed, as Shalman destroyed Beth Arbel in the day of battle. The mother was dashed in pieces with her children. So Bethel will do to you because of your great wickedness. At daybreak the king of Israel will be destroyed. Comment again, we'll explain a few things from verses 11 to 15, then we'll give the flow of it. In verse 11, the verb to thresh can also be translated to trample, tear, or break. In verse 14, Shalman is probably Assyrian king Shalmaneser, who reigned from 727 to 722. Beth Arbel means house of God's ambush, so when it says Shalman destroyed Beth Arbel, it's that Shalmaneser destroyed a place that had God's wrath on it. And historically, Shalmaneser is the king who struck the final blow against Samaria in 722. So it turned out that the kingdom of Israel was another house of God's wrath destroyed by Shalmaneser. In verse 14, the mother will be dashed in pieces with her children. This means there will be wartime atrocities. In verse 15, so Bethel will do to you because of your great wickedness. It's not Bethel per se, but the abominations at Bethel are stirring up God's wrath, and God's wrath will destroy them. In verse 15, at daybreak the king of Israel will be destroyed. Hosea was their last king. He presided over the fall of Samaria in 722. The Bible doesn't give us the details of Hosea's personal fate, but ancient Assyrian records indicate he was taken prisoner. That would make the flow of verses 11 to 15 something like, Ephraim is a trained heifer that loves to thresh, trample, break, and destroy. So I'll put a yoke on her beautiful neck. I'll put a rider on Ephraim. Judah will pull the plow. Jacob will break up clods. Yes, I'll force them into suffering, misery, and servitude. You should rather sow righteousness, and you would reap kindness. Break up your fallow ground. Open your hearts to me, because it's time to seek Yahweh. Seek him until he comes and rains righteousness on you. You've plowed in wickedness and reaped iniquity. You've swallowed lies. You figured you'd be okay because of the size and might of your army. Therefore a battle roar will arise among your people, but it will turn into a cry of defeat. All your fortresses will be destroyed, as Shalmaneser destroyed Beth Arbel, the house of God's wrath, in the day of battle. The mother was dashed in pieces with her children. Because of places like Bethel, the wrath of God will destroy you in your great wickedness. At daybreak the king of Israel will be destroyed. Hosea 11 is next.